Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Asian Conference, I, Bhamik Mathur, extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished moderator, our eminent speakers, and all the participants joining us online through YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. We are very pleased to have you with us for the webinar Strategic Ports in the Bay of Bengal Competing Visions for Connectivity and Growth. Thank you for taking the time to be a part of this important conversation. The Bay of Bengal is emerging as a critical maritime and economic space in the Indo-Pacific. As countries seek to strengthen trade and connectivity, ports are becoming increasingly important not only as gateways for commerce, but also as centers of investment, industrial development, and strategic influence. India, China, Japan, and other regional countries are pursuing different but overlapping visions for connectivity and infrastructure in the region. At the same time, ports across Bay of Bengal are competing to attract shipping lines, cargo, and investments. Today's discussion will examine the evolving strategic competition among Bay of Bengal ports and its implications for regional trade flows, investment patterns, and industrial development and connectivity. It will also explore practical measures to enhance port competitiveness and develop stronger port-led industrial ecosystems. We are delighted to have with us three distinguished experts for this discussion. Our moderator today is Commodore Debesh Lahiri, Distinguished Fellow Asian Conference and Advisor, National Center of Excellence for Green Ports and Shipping, the Energy and Resources Institute. Joining him is Dr. Sanjeev Ranjan, Distinguished Fellow, Asian Conference and former Secretary, Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways, Government of India. We also have with us Dr. Nandakishore MS, Head and Associate Professor, Department of Politics and International Studies, Pondicherry University. We are grateful to all speakers for joining us today for this important conversation. We also invite our online audience to participate in the discussion by posting your questions for the speakers in the YouTube comment section. With that, I would now like to hand over the proceedings to our moderator, Commodore Debesh Lahiri, to take the discussion forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Momik, and good evening to everybody online, and welcome to this very important discussion on strategic ports in the Bay of Bengal, competing visions for connectivity and growth, which I would say is a very, very timely discussion. As we are all aware, the economic potential of the Bay of Bengal is yet to be fully realized. And whilst the Bay of Bengal is the western part of the Indo-Pacific, and our enunciation of Act East, Sagar, and now the Mahasagar policy by the Honorable Prime Minister, Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific, and of course, their Bay of Bengal Industrial Growth Belt Corridor initiatives in the Bay of Bengal area. And never to forget the Chinese influence that is growing rapidly in this area in very distinct forms. But ports are one of the major areas where, whether it is in Mongla in Bangladesh, Chokfu in, say, Myanmar, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, they are trying to spread their influence, and it is incumbent upon everybody in this region. When I say the region, it also includes the land-linked, I wouldn't like to call them landlocked, the land-linked countries of Bhutan and Nepal were extremely dependent on the Bay of Bengal for their economic activities. To lead us through this discussion, as introduced by Mr. Bhamik Mathur, we have two very eminent speakers. We, of course, have Dr. Sanjeev Ranjan, former Secretary, Ministry of Port, Shipping and Waterways, and presently a member of the Adjudicatory Board of Major Ports. We also have with us Dr. Nandakishore Das, MS, who is the head of Department of Politics and International Studies of the Pondicherry University. What I intend to do is I would request both the speakers to make their opening remarks. I understand Dr. Ranjan has a presentation for us. So I would request Dr. Ranjan to go ahead with his presentation, following which I would request Dr. Das to give his opening remarks for about 5 to 7 minutes. We could then have a structured Q&A, followed by, I've already received about 9 questions from our online attendees, which I will try and group them, since they have not indicated as to which panelist would they like it to be answered by. But going by the nature of the questions, I have kind of divided it into amongst Dr. Ranjan and Dr. Das. So, Ranjan sir, if I may request you to kindly proceed with your presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Commodore Lahiri, for the introduction. Professor Nandakishore and Mr. Bhaumik Mathur for organizing the whole thing. I thank the Asian Conference for giving me this chance. I have a PPT, and Mr. Bhaumik, you would be sharing that. Good. So the first slide is on the screen now. This is the kind of issues that I'm going to discuss. With the introduction which Commodore Lahiri gave, the fact that the Bay of Bengal is again the center of geopolitics because of the increasing importance in terms of the cargo that moves through the channels in the Indian Ocean down south. Half of the containers, 2/3 of the oil cargo moves through these waters. And you have the major power play happening in our backyard. Historically, Bay of Bengal was the center of global history. We are coming back to that kind of situation once again. And therefore, there's a need to have this discussion, and all the more so where the Hormuz crisis has disrupted the supply chains. And all the countries in the region, whether it is India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Thailand, they have challenges of sourcing their energy requirements, LPG, fertilizers in time. And as the whole setup has gone real time, I think the criticality of how do we create the maritime architecture in the region needs to be discussed threadbare, so that we are able to overcome these challenges which are emerging in our backyard. The things which Commodore Lahiri mentioned with some other countries trying to get a foothold and competing for getting access to the ports is one way of looking at it. All the ports compete with each other, and we are in a situation like that. But the challenges of making our supply chains resilient which is confronting all of us. So do we get into a network kind of arrangement where all the ports are connected? The way shipping is changing, we are getting into a situation where the ships are getting bigger and bigger. The old way of the ports getting connected by individual vessels, I think, is something which is going to be difficult as we go along. There will be some mega ports, there will be transshipment ports which are closer to the main shipping channels, and there will be hubs. That's the kind of architecture which is shaping up. And therefore, for everyone to be in the game, we necessarily have to work together to be able to create an architecture which is more like a hub and spoke. And if all of us work together, all the countries around the Bay of Bengal are going to benefit out of it. So the present situation of the area getting important, the criticality of supply chain, all of us is forcing us to look at the emerging reality. The countries in the region have been trying to work together through various kind of platforms. BIMSTEC has brought all of us together. You have the BIMSTEC vision, you have the BIMSTEC declaration, you have the maritime agreement, etc., etc. Plus, there are a whole host of projects, be it through the BIMSTEC master plan or the various corridors. Some of them I have listed here, which have been the pipeline. So the ports and these economic corridors are being developed all on a standalone kind of a basis. But if you're able to get them all networked together and create hubs, the entire logistics ecosystem that we have today in the region is going to be strengthened. And if you have a network, they would have the people would have options. Countries would have options that even if there is a challenge in one possible supply chain, there would be fallback options created. So that is a kind of vision which I think we need to be adopting. And this is broadly the kind of issues which I have tried to put together in the presentation, and the following slides would generally follow this path. So I think if we go slide by slide, I quickly run through it so that the details are there before you. These are essentially the ports that we have on the Indian coast. And we have been able to add substantial port capacity in the last 10 years. And our capacity is, say, 30-40% more than what we actually handle. And we have a pipeline of projects already there. So hopefully, in terms of capacity, we are going to be well off. It's happened thanks to the major initiatives we've taken in terms of the next slide shows that the Maritime India Vision 2030, where there was a focus on getting major ports around on our coast to make them smarter, to make them multimodal, the institutional reforms in terms of the Major Ports Act, which came about in 2021, which created the landlord port model, which made them efficient. And we could harness the power of PPP, both in terms of investment that came in and the efficiencies. We also have the next big vision of 2047, the Mahasagar vision, which also had additional features which amplified the earlier features of 2030 vision in terms of sustainability and having maritime clusters, making our ports more efficient. So all these things have been in the pipeline for the last few years, which have really helped our ports to become world-class and become energy hubs. Some of our ports like Kandla, Tuticorin today are green energy hubs and are leading the world in terms of the way ports can supply green energy, not just to ships, but to the entire ecosystem. The other slide generally highlights the kind of targets that we have. By 2030, the capacity we have for ports is 3,000, going up to 10,000 by 2047. Deeper ports, the fact that we have seafarers, which are virtually to be found on every ship of the world, is something I think we need to be proud of. But it's also a issue which I think we got to be careful about, because every now and then the challenges that we face because of the criticality of the Hormuz, where our Indian seafarers are the ones who get impacted. So that is one area where we have to be looking at while we develop our maritime power in terms of having more seafarers. The other slide, which is necessary to link our ports with the rest of the ecosystem in terms of port performance, productivity, operating ratio. Thanks to the changes that have happened, our ports are able to produce enough surpluses, which can go in for creating more capacities, creating more linkages. And the linkages necessarily have to be of the kind where the hinterland is connected end to end. And the next two slides, which I have on inland waterways and on coastal shipping, so the ports can't be standalone. Today, where the customer expects resilient kind of supply chain, he expects the ports to be seamlessly connected. His cargo should move from the factory to the customer seamlessly, and the ports need to be able to do that. Therefore, the ports, in addition to the port chairman, in addition to making the port efficient, also have to work on the coastal shipping and the inland waterways to be able to provide seamless connectivity. And the next slide gives the numbers in terms of what we've been able to do as far as PPP is concerned. So we have a model which is pretty robust. We've been able to improve upon it. There's a pipeline, as is given in the slide here. We have enough projects, and we expect an investment of about 2 lakh odd crores in the next 5 years as far as the port modernization is concerned. And this resource is going to come from the private sector. And with this resource which is coming into the sector, in addition to modernizing the existing ports, there is a pipeline of new ports which are there, which is shown in the next slide. The new ports which you have listed here, Galathea Bay is, I think, one port which we need to be discussing at length, particularly when we talk of Bay of Bengal. You have the Bahuda in Odisha. You have the existing ports getting expanded. Visakhapatnam Outer Harbour is one of the best kind of container terminal that we have. The Tuticorin port also has a new investment which is going to make it really deep draft. So, and Kamarajar port also has these things happening. So, the challenge that we had in terms of draft, I think in the next 1-2 years, we would be able to handle bigger vessels at our own ports. The Vizhingham port is already up and operational. So, the transshipment which used to happen on other ports is happening to a large measure on Indian shore. But while we do all this, the Galathea Bay project, which I think is something important, and when we in this discussion, I think I would like to highlight the importance of Galathea Bay and how it can help reconfigure the maritime architecture, which is going to be beneficial for all the countries in the region. Therefore, quite a few slides later, I'll try to highlight there have been some discussion on the Galathea Bay, some concerns raised. But I have tried to put some of these records, official records, to bring to light the kind of, to address some of the concerns which are being raised. While the ports themselves, the next slide shows that while the port development, etc., is going to be key to creating the new maritime architecture, getting the shipbuilding cluster, getting the logistics parks, getting the growth centers, are going to create the kind of ecosystem where you would have economic corridors, where the ports will be able to get cargo, the corridors would be able to generate the employment, the growth, etc., and the entrepreneurs here, the startups which are linked to the port, should be able to supply their goods across the world. So that's the kind of ecosystem which is being created, and the transformative reforms, which is shown on the next slide, is the Sagarmala project, the revised concession agreement, etc. They have all helped us to come to the position that we are at. And the Maritime India vision, which is again come to the next slide, has been both the 2030 vision and the 2047 vision had seen transshipment as something which we need to take seriously. And therefore, Galathea Bay was one of the projects which was identified. And the large volume of transshipment which happens on foreign shores, and therefore introduces an element of uncertainty as far as our supply chains are concerned, is something that needs to be overcome. And therefore, ports like Vizhingham, the other deep draft ports that are being developed, the Galathea Bay become critical. And as the world shipping has moved from the old way of moving things to containerization, the multimodality, which was difficult, has become the order of the day. More cargo, 40% of the bulk carriers, the break bulk carriers are reducing in number, the container carriers are increasing in number, virtually replacing the break bulk carriers. That's the way the cargo is being moved. And containers, if we are able to do the switching from one mode, can be switched easily from one mode to another, provided we are able to make our ports efficient, make them digital, make sure that the documentation, the loading, unloading, etc., which takes time, we are able to make it quickly. So that is the kind of move which is happening. So multimodality is something we have to live with. And therefore, if the next few slides, I have just tried to show that what has been done on multimodality. This is the kind of ecosystem that is being created for having multimodal linkages. The next slide, the larger policy measures which have been announced both in terms of the PM Gati Shakti and the logistics policy are essential to make. The next one is the logistics policy, that everyone tries to put his logistics supply chain into a mode which is multimodal rather than be dependent on just one source of supply. So not just the ports, but all the end users, whether it's the petroleum companies, whether it's the fertilizer companies, whether it is the FCI, everyone has to be adopting all this so that in case the Middle East fertilizer is becoming a challenge, as per the logistics plan, they should have had alternatives up their sleeve. I think this is the wake-up call, where whether it's energy, whether it's LPG, whether it's fertilizer, both these policies have called upon these all the agencies involved to be able to have robust supply chains. And therefore, the homework has to be, I think there's a call to do that planning in advance and develop the required infrastructure and the other the customs, the movement of goods, all those hiccups which are there, we should be able to get them realigned. The next slide, again, I have tried to say that what are the kind of lessons that we learn from Hormuz. Of course, we can't be dependent on one possible supply chain. Just being dependent on Middle East for LPG or for fertilizer is going to run us into a major challenge. And therefore, more robust, diverge sources of supply is something which is being done as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which a lot of work has already been done, but I suppose it has to be a long-term kind of a plan. While the Hormuz has a challenge, the next slide again, is the Red Sea also has challenges. Next slide, please. Yeah. So given the situation, the entire logistics supply infrastructure is being recalibrated. Everyone is being forced to recalibrate. The assumption that everything would be just in time and you don't have to bother, you place a supply order and you would get it, and you don't have to store anything, and only talk of cutting cost is a thing of the past. And therefore, with all these crises coming up, and the next slide again highlights the importance of the place that we are looking at, the Bay of Bengal, with the kind of volumes that move alongside. The next slide again, I love to show this slide everywhere, where the Bay of Bengal was the center before the new world was talked about or discovered. If you look at this map, this is from the book The Golden Road by William D'Alembert, where the area we are talking of, Bay of Bengal, is the center of the maritime world. The Bay of Bengal is in the center of China on one side, the Middle East and Europe for the Roman world on the other, and it is the ports here which are in the center of the world. Again, we are coming back to that situation. Now, how do we create that architecture is what we talk in the next slide, is the need for these resilient multimodal supply chains, where there are end-to-end digital ecosystem which are interoperable. You have to have for example, the IMEC, which was announced 3 years back. Again, because of the Middle East crisis, the movement has not been of the order which was expected. But India and UAE, for example, have tried to get the digital part of it harmonized. The Maitri thing is already going on. On the Indian side, our ports have expanded. The crisis in the Gulf has shown that while you can't maybe you have challenges getting into Dubai, but Fujairah is the major point, and you transship from Fujairah into the rest of the Omani's ports into the Middle East now. So multimodality has been the saving grace as far as the Hormuz crisis is concerned, as far as UAE is concerned, and thanks to the homework that was done because of IMEC. So I suppose this is a lesson where these economic corridors and multimodality have come to the rescue, because whatever infrastructure was there is now being fully used. And that's how the congestion was removed. We come to the next slide, and therefore my summation is that we need to be creating these integrated multimodal corridors which are linked to each other, not the ports which are standalone. The next slide lists out the various kind of things which are already there. They have been around for quite some time, whether it's the Kaladan multimodal transit project, we have the protocol of Indian waterways, traded transit between India and Bangladesh. Things are moving. We have the coastal shipping agreements with some other countries in the region. We have agreements for Chottagaram and Mongla. We have the BIMSTEC agreement on maritime transport cooperation, which has already been adopted by all the countries around the Bay of Bengal. We have the master plan for transport connectivity. Now, the two of these things which are here, I think, give us the framework. The world today requires these things to be moving at a faster pace. Now the challenge is to be able to bring the countries together to be able to make these things operational. The declaration is there. I have just a few slides after that, and it's in India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Myanmar. Everyone is part of this game. The Kaladan multimodal project. Please continue. I've just tried to map some of these multimodal things which are there. The east-west, where we have the India and Bangladesh protocol route where things are moving. We had the longest cruise, for example, in 23. December, January, which we were able to demonstrate that waterways can take vessels from Varanasi all the way to Dubdigor via Bangladesh, and they can very well get linked to all the ports in the area, and therefore the hinterland both of India and Bangladesh get connected. While next slide is the other corridor that we have been able to establish between Chennai and the Russian east coast. All this also runs through Bay of Bengal. The next slide again is the fact that Galathea Bay has made substantial progress over the years. It has been in the part of the vision, but the PPAC in the meeting in March 26 has recommended this project with investment of 48,000 crores. And the idea is that initially we are able to have a 11 million TUs kind of a facility created. And going forward, we should be able to link it to the ports in the Bay of Bengal. The next slide is again the fact that the entire area was connected and Bay of Bengal is in the middle is just a map to show that. The next slide, please. It's not recent. I picked up this slide from a book, The Great Ports of Asia in History, by the curator of the Singapore Museum, where the relics at Ok Eno in Cambodia, in the Mekong Delta, has archaeological evidence to suggest that people from the Indian shore through what we are talking of, the Andaman Sea, would travel through the Kra Peninsula into these areas. So the Bay of Bengal has been the connecting link for ages. The next slide, please. And therefore, these connections have been, while the history part of it is known to all of us, we also have these traditions of the Boita Bandara and so on, where all these civilization links are well established. The next slide. The coming back to Galathea Bay, the controversy part of it, I would like to just address a few things. The initial feasibility study, which was done by AECOM, looked at a whole host of alternative sites. And then after looking at the alternatives, Galathea Bay was selected because it was found to be the one which was most suitable, both in terms of the draft availability, the distance from the main shipping channel, the least ecological impact, etc., etc. The next slide. And having selected the site, the design, these are the kind of considerations that went into it. This again, I picked it from the feasibility study, which anyone who's interested can possibly have a look at it. And the next slide is the kind of topology which the bay is supposed, the Galathea Bay is supposed to have. The idea is to have the minimum ecological impact. And the next slide, the kind of volumes which have been recommended by the PPAC is given here. People who are interested can look at the numbers. The next slide, the feasibility of the Galathea Bay itself, as you can see, is dependent on the cargo from not just the Indian ports on the eastern coast. It is Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Singapore. All the containers which right now go from Bangladesh all the way to Singapore and then come back to Mumbai, adding to extra cost to the exporter from Bangladesh, and a similar kind of a shipping link exists for some of the other movements which happen. Now, if we can have Galathea Bay as the center and a hub, and all the ports in the Bay of Bengal are seamlessly linked in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the protocols that we have, it is going to be a win-win for everyone. You save on time, you save on distance, you save on costs. And therefore, that is the kind of vision which the Galathea Bay has. The next slide, please. And the costing of 48,000 crores that I mentioned is given here, is part of the minutes of the PPAC. The next slide, the idea of the project, the way it has been recommended is that there would be substantial viability gap funding. So the PPP operator who comes in gets a reasonable rate of return, which is shown as 17.3%. So with the viability gap funding, hopefully there would be the private operators would come forward and take on this project so that the efficiency of the private sector get captured. But while the private operator may be able to set up the port, the fact that the countries have to work together to align our custom procedures, to be able to establish linkages, to be able to network, is something which I think institutions like Asian, our institution, have to be able to sensitize the countries in the region that it's a win-win for everyone. And the issues of ecological concerns which are there, which I have tried to cover in the next slide, have been addressed. Next slide, please. In the minutes, I've just produced the minutes of the environmental clearance and the NGT findings, where the next one also. These are the minutes and the NGT order, where the mitigation measures have been mandated for the Galathea Bay project to necessarily comply with. So the next slide, please. So the project, with the recent kind of discussion on that, I just wanted to cull that out and put it here to show that the environmental impact, etc., the EC clearance and the other mandatory requirements which have been imposed on the project developer would help to mitigate that to a substantial extent. And I think that's one thing which we have to be able to closely monitor, for which, again, institutions of repute like the Wildlife Institutes, etc., have been given the responsibility, and it should be part of the project cost. And the concerns are genuine, but at the same time, the importance of the project, the strategic requirement of the hub to be able to have resilient supply chain, particularly for area where there's a lot of things happening and there are other competing interests. So if we're able to take care of the mitigation measures, then all these projects which are around for quite some time, Galathea Bay and the harmonization and the working together can possibly help to bring all the countries together and make these things happen. The next slide is, again, I've tried to list it out, that it's high time that we made these economic corridors up and functional and make them network. The next slide is the extract from the BIMSTEC declaration, where at the highest level, all the heads of the state of all the countries around the Bay of Bengal have called upon everyone who is in the game, to be able to have trade facilitation measures in place. And the next slide again, it talks of the agreement on maritime transport cooperation. How can we have that built in, so that while we have this agreement which has come into, I think it's been adopted by all the countries in the region, and they have the first of the activities which need to be taken up, that how can we make this maritime transport cooperation work. And one of that could be that all of us are able to make Galathea Bay a hub and be able to develop the counter kind of arrangements which are required at individual ports. The next slide is the vision for BIMSTEC Bangkok 2030. Here again, the first line itself is to strengthen the regional supply chain, whether it's a BIMSTEC supply chain or the supply chain linking us to ASEAN, is what is the concern. And therefore, the institutions like Asian Conference should be looking at how do we bring all these stakeholders together, make these visions actually work for the larger interest of all the countries in the region. Galathea Bay is one of the projects which can help do that. The next slide I have is how to move forward on Galathea Bay. Galathea Bay can become the anchor for the BIMSTEC and be able to link it to the ASEAN further east. And it can become a connectivity hub. The next slide, like Singapore is for the ASEAN, the Galathea Bay could be for the BIMSTEC region in Bay of Bengal. It could also be the next slide, the green hub. Now our ports are going green. Galathea Bay has the advantage of starting from scratch. So it could be the port which can provide bunkering of methanol, green hydrogen, etc., to all the major ships which go through the channel. And if you're able to create that, in addition to transshipment, it instead of ships burning bunker oil, if they burn methanol or green hydrogen, they're going to be reducing the carbon footprint. So that should be able to offset some of the concerns on ecology that people have been raising. And Galathea Bay is a great place where this can happen very quickly. So the next slide, again, I said the challenge for Galathea Bay is to balance ecology with development given the strategic requirements. So we have a civilizational kind of a history as far as Galathea Bay, which I showed in the slide linking with us with the Mekong Delta. So strategically, economically, environmentally, civilizationally, from all these fronts, Galathea Bay can become the anchor point. And this is, I think, the right time. Next slide. This is the right time, I said, and the Hormuz crisis has brought all the countries together. Everyone in the region is trying to find a solution. If you're able to get everyone on board, make them think together, these things which have been in the pipeline should be able to work for the larger benefit of all of us. The next slide. And while we do that, I think it's time we have a national strategy for resilient supply chain to be able to have some kind of cargo which is anchored for each of these economic corridors. The oil should necessarily move only through, for example, LPG goes through Chittagong into the northeast. Why not food grains? The similar thing could be done for Kaladan. Similar thing could be done for the other corridors that we are doing. If you are able to mandate that, then there may be initial extra costs, but the corridors will become operational. And while we have priority cargo streams, there are multiple stakeholders, each of them, and therefore they should be given a time-bound kind of. They should be made to sign time-bound service guarantees, so that the custom people don't create delays when it changes from one mode to another. So that's the kind of frameworks we need to create to be able to make these corridors up and operational. And if you're able to do that, the vision of Mahasagar that we talk of for all the countries in the region, be able to do that. So that is my submission. I hope the Asian Conference and everyone who's listening is able to carry some of these ideas forward. Thank you very much for giving me the time, Commodore Lahiri, and everyone for bearing with me.
Thank you, sir, for that very comprehensive overview of the development that is taking place and your specific focus on Galathea, which, but obviously should be there because of the kind of potential that it holds, not only in getting the region bound together, but also in the terms of economic opportunities that place is going to throw up. I have myself served in the Andaman Nicobar, and I've been to Galathea in that area several times. And I can fully understand and align with your views that whilst there are ecological and environmental challenges, but they're not beyond overcoming. And with a structured plan as has been laid out in the EAC, in fact, I also went through the minutes, and there is some compensatory afforestation. Since Andaman Nicobar 75% forestation is already done, they have actually moved to Haryana to do the compensatory afforestation. So there are plenty of measures that are afoot, and I'm sure they will take place. And it's planned in 3 phases. And as it happens, you also mentioned, while student highlight that point, that it is going to be an important strategic hub for the Indian Navy. From a national strategic defense interest, Campbell Bay and Galathea is an extremely important area where we need to position some of our assets so that the necessary deterrence is in place for any misadventure by any of our neighbors. Having said that, you also focused a lot on the multimodality of the projects, which I think we should all remember that the fragility of the global supply chains actually came under a very sharp focus during COVID. And after COVID, the present geopolitical crisis in the West Asia, that is both in the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Bab el-Mandab and Suez, has only refocused the entire issue that we need to have extremely resilient regional supply chains so that we are not at the mercy of other countries for our various requirements, whether it be fuel, whether it be fertilizer, whatever the food grains, as has been shown in the recent crises. So moving on, may I now request Dr. Nandakumar Das if you can kindly give your opening remarks. Thereafter, I'll open it up for Q&A. Dr. Das, over to you.
Sorry, I'm Dr. Nand Kishore. That's all. I don't have a Das in my name.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
But nevertheless, thanks to the chair and also my co-panelists for an excellent presentation. And my apologies, I got a bit delayed because of unavoidable circumstances associated with my responsibilities as a head of the department. We had a meeting with the Vice Chancellor. But nevertheless, a lot of interesting points have been spoken about. And what I am trying to talk about in the remaining some time that's left for us is on the strategic ports at the Bay. And at the same time, the competing vision is what I'm trying to concentrate about. Because the whole Bay of Bengal itself has been described through the language of, let's say, encirclement, where it is essentially, or India itself is casted as a target of the Chinese string of pearls. Now, I don't really believe in this particular component because the real contest in the Bay is not between two navies, but between three connectivity visions. I'm going to talk about Vision 1, Vision 2, Vision 3, and then I'll juxtapose them and we'll try looking at where are they exactly driving us. Now, China's drive for, let's say, having continental access, the shared Indian and Japanese preference for quality infrastructure inside a free and open Indo-Pacific, and the hedging strategies of the coastal state themselves is a very interesting case here. That's the reason I'm taking a few of them. For example, the Capcube, Mongla, Hambantota, Colombo, or for the matter, Matrabari or the Sitwe. Any of these, I'm trying to look at these as decisive variable that's not naval basing, but execution part of it. Now, which partner delivers reliable, financed, and completed port capacity on time? Now, what are the type of measures that India carries in terms of whatever that existing? We're able to see as some sort of a delivery deficit, because I also have students from Bangladesh, a couple of students working from Bangladesh with me as ICCR scholars. I get this first-hand experience to listen to them, because otherwise we tend to listen to our own ways of thinking and ways of imagining in and around us. And that's where the whole idea of the Bay of Bengal comes into the picture. Now, the standard picture that we all get whenever we talk about Bay of Bengal is a typical map with some sort of red dots and marking. Because I also had a presentation, I thought I'll not do that. I'll just go on an oral component of it. Is this idea of as if it is to choke Indian sea lanes. And a lot of them have, as I said at the beginning, a lot of them have spoken about the string of pearls and many other things, but it has to be treated with a bit of caution, because it assumes the intent that is rarely proven, and it also treats coastal states as some sort of passive stepping stones, and it also reduces a very complex economic story to a simple naval one. For me, a much more useful starting point is to ask each of the actor what actually they want. Now, three answers that emerge in whatever minimum research that I've done is that it just does not get fixed up into a single idea of the India versus China axis. Now, China wants overland access to the Indian Ocean that avoids the Straits of Malacca, so that the energy and trade can reach its landlocked southeast. That's the first part. India and Japan want to build port and logistic capacity to, let's say, of high standard, partly for commercial return, and also partly to keep the region from becoming a Chinese sphere. That's the second part. Now, the coastal states of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, they want investment, transshipment, revenue, jobs. These are very, very clear. So they play the outside parts against each other to get the best terms. That's why the Bay is a market for infrastructure as much as it is a chessboard. That's my take on that one. Because if you look at why the Bay has to matter so much, India's own official reading confirms the typical shift that we have been having. The maritime front from the Actis to what we have as of now is an interesting story. According to reporting on the India's National Maritime Security Strategy of 2026, it names India's, let's say, Eastern Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal as arenas of long-term competition, shaped by ports, logistical networks, digital links, and also dual-use facilities, rather than just by the naval balances alone. Now, I said I will talk about three important visions that are important here. The vision one is China's continental access model. Now, China's port interest in the Bay is best understood because we're talking about contesting visions. It has an access problem, not a basing plan. Now, around 80% of China's imported oil passes through the Malacca Strait, a choke point it does not control. That is very, very important here. Now, I made a mention of one of the places in Myanmar, in the Rakhine State, is a typical answer to this one. It is the coastal terminus of oil and natural gas pipeline that run through Kunming in Yunnan, built between roughly around 2010 to 2015. And the proposed deep sea port would let cargo from the West Asian region, Africa, and India land there and move also overland into China's southwest region for perhaps. Now, the port itself has stalled. Cost was renegotiated down from about 7.3 billion US dollars to roughly 1.3 billion. No meaningful construction has been observed on the ground as of at least 2025, with ownership reported at CITIC 70%, and the Myanmar side has some 30%. This was reported in the People's Map of Global China in 2025. Now, the reason is the civil war. Now, much of the Rakhine has fallen to the Arakan army. Chinese workers have left sites over safety, and the junta itself has reinforced the town to keep the asset from changing hands. Now, each of the climb that we are trying to look at here, that the Chinese naval base remains very, very speculative. Now, analysts also note, a number of them have actually worked on this one. In fact, we also have a student called Vijay who keeps working on this. They note that legal and political limits inside Myanmar make military use unlikely. That is the idea here. Now, China is also now widening the play from a single port to a corridor. Now, some of the reporting also says that accelerating the China-Myanmar-Bangladesh economic corridor, a distributed logistical network across Northern Bay rather than one flagship harbor is what they're trying to look at. The most concrete recent gains in Bangladesh is typical, because in Sri Lanka, if you look in, China holds the Hambantota port on a long lease, which is known. I think too much has been spoken about it. Now, President Anura Dissanayake, interestingly, signed a deal worth 3.7 billion US dollars for a China-built oil refinery there itself. Now, the second vision is, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's India-Japan quality infrastructure model. Now, against the Chinese model, it's a very looser, perhaps, let's say, the Indian-Chinese partnership, built on the idea that better built, better governed infrastructure will win on merit. Now, three cases show the approach, and it's also mixed record. For example, Matarbari in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar district is the clearest example here. It's Bangladesh's first deep sea port, financed by the Japan International Cooperation Agency and also tied to Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision, which they've been talking for a very, very long time. Now, the construction with the first phase targeted with completion around, let's say, 2029 and commercial operations from about 2030 is what they're anticipating. The port is designed for vessels roughly of around 8,020 foot equivalent units at EU and a jetty about 760 meters. Now, larger investments and the impact figures quoted in some of the coverage is somewhere around 60 to 65 billion US dollars over the, let's say, next 3 decades. That's the plan that they have. Now, Matarbari matters strategically because it links 3 economies, that is Bangladesh, Japan, and India, and gives India's landlocked northeast potential sea outlet without depending on a Chinese-built facility. That's something that we have been working for a long time. Now, Colombo is comparatively a success story that India can always point out to. The Colombo West International Terminal that run by a consortium of the India's Adani Ports, Sri Lanka's John Kills Holding, and also Sri Lanka Ports Authority under a 35-year build, operate, transfer deal. It started operating in 2025 April. It represents an investment of around, let's say, 800 million US dollars, offers 1,400 meter quay and also 20 meter depth, and also it's Colombo's first fully automated deep water terminal. This is something that we have already figured it out. Now, some of the works that I'm going through, for example, the United States International Development Finance Corporation, it says that it's committed to about 553 million US dollars to the project itself, which many of them think that this is essentially to counterweight the Chinese component here. Now, Sitwe completes this particular picture that we are talking about Sri Lanka, and then we are also bringing in Bangladesh here for the simple reason, and it's the sobering case with regard to India at least, because India built the port on the Kaladan River in the Rakhine with a grant of roughly around 500 million US dollars, inaugurated somewhere in May 2023. and took over the operations through the India Ports Global Limited in January 2025. By then, it handled around 150 vessels, and it has been fairly doing well. Yet the port is, let's say, is close to stranded component. It is one part of the whole project that we were talking about, the Kaladan one, whose road link from, let's say, Palitwa in Myanmar to Zorimpo in Mizoram is unfinished and also runs through territory contested by the Arakan army. Now, these will be very, very problematic, but we still somewhere think that the full corridor should be operational by 2027, a target, something that is, I think, is worth watching, given the sort of conflict engulfing. Third vision is the coastal states as typical agents, not as pawns here. This third vision is the one that brings in the whole idea of the encirclement into the picture. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, because they pursue their own hubs and revenues and also switch partners when it suits them. Like yesterday, there was this particular question that was posed whether it is China or India. Then the typical answer that was given from the Nepalese side was very, very interesting. It's the same way I think these people also run the show on many occasions. Now, Bangladesh openly wants to become a regional transshipment hub, so its own cargo can reach Europe and then the Americas without feeder trips through Singapore, Colombo, or for that matter, even Malaysia. Now, that ambition, not loyalty to India or China, drives its own choices, which it's as a sovereign nation, it has a capacity to keep itself. Now, Sri Lanka runs the same logic. Colombo is already a major transshipment center, and it also hosts an Indian terminal, a Chinese-built terminal, and then you have also got a Chinese oil refinery in Hambantota at the same time. The Myanmar one is interesting because they want to extract value from both the project that they have, but they also are struggling with the civil war. The lesson is very, very simple and straightforward, that they want to hedge deliberately. We use this term in international relations, the idea of hedging, because they will take Chinese capital where it flows fastest, Japanese finance where the terms are soft, and Indian goodwill where the geography is unavoidable. Because any Indian strategy that treats them as objects to be secured rather than customers to be won will keep losing ground. This is the reality, because I don't want to be giving an exemplarily, let's say, a positive picture that everything is great. Now, what exactly is India's problem? Here, I see the real problem as delivery deficit. Because if the coastal states are the customers, India's central weakness is the unreliable supplier here. The Mongla case is the sharpest illustration. The Mongla port and the economic zone had been earmarked for India under an initiative dating somewhere around 2015, not now. It's been more than a decade now. After the fall of Sheikh Hasina's government in 2024, following the Indian delay, now Dhaka going through its own scenario, because we don't have control over their politics, their perception, and then there are also ways of looking at things with regard to India. We don't have real control over that. Now, a separate Chittagong economic zone was also reassigned from India to the Chinese drone manufacturing use in early 2026. Now, China did not, outcompete India with a better navy. Let's be very, very clear about it. It just outcompeted India by being ready to build while India hesitated, because we are a democracy. We are a procedural democracy. We have certain limitations, unlike the Chinese, the way they can talk about it. That's why I find typically two blind spots here. One is the over-reliance on, too much with regard to, we believed Sheikh Hasina will be forever, and almost we thought, and that was very, very personal. When she fell, the relationship and the projects fell along with her. A strategy now that depends on a single friendly government is certainly not a strategy. It's a typical bet. By God's grace, I think the present one is also comparatively, is a reasonable individual than what number of punters on Bangladesh spoke about. I think things will get better, and no irritant should happen like the way it happened, where Sheikh Hasina started speaking in the public sphere and it has created a nuisance value. That should not perhaps happen. I've written about this as well. Second is the speed and the follow through. Now, Sitwe took over 2 decades from planning to operation, and its road link is still incomplete. Mongla lapsed on Indian delay. China's edge is not deeper strategy, but faster delivery. The coastal governments notice which partner actually furnishes, and is their national interest. I cannot say, no, you have to be with me only, I'm a good person. Good person doesn't just work in international relations. There have to be a lot of things that are, because after all, foreign policy is all about outputs and outcomes. And if they are not delivered, I think there's a problem here. Now, India's problem in the Bay is less about the Chinese ambition than about Indian execution. naval exercise such as Milan or any of these that we are talking about, they're gathering. New strategy documents signal an intent. There is no doubt about it. That intent is very important, because that intent shows that we are committed to doing something. But the intent does not pour concrete. That's the issue here. Unless India shortens its delivery timelines and also de-risks its project from single points of, let's say, political failure, it will keep announcing partnerships that others will actually come and complete here. So what we need to do here, what will actually decide the outcome: delivery speed, political durability, conflict exposure, commercial logic. All these are very, very important. This is exactly my concern, and these are the three visions that I was trying to talk about. Just to conclude, so that we have enough time for discussions and other things, the Bay of Bengal is certainly not being encircled. It is being wired port by port into competing logistical systems, and the wiring is done by whoever shows up with finances and finishes the job. That's as simple as that. China offers speed and continental access, but carries the risk of stalled, conflict exposed assets. That's the problem. Japan and India will offer quality and better governance. There is no doubt about it. But in India's case, a record of delay is been there for a very, very long time. And we've been talking about it, but I really don't know where is it heading to. The coastal states will keep selling access to the highest and the fastest bidder. That's our neighbors, and they will continue to do this. So for India, the strategic conclusion is uncomfortable, but it's clear. At least that part should be clear. Its rivals in the Bay are its own timelines, its habits of leaning on friendly governments, and its also slowness to convert plans into working ports. Now, typically, the moment we fix the delivery deficit, the map actually will look manageable. That's why I said I had some maps and other things to show how they're all connected. If we leave it unfixed, no strategy document will actually hold the line. But I still am hopeful that with the type of things that we are taking up, I think it should be moving towards deliverables, because of late I'm not listening anybody talking about the BIMSTEC, because in between there's so much of buzz in between, and everybody was talking about it. Now suddenly there seems to be a lull, except a small corridor there. Here some people are working about it. Though I'm not pessimistic about it, but at the same time I'm thinking that it's a reality check for India at this juncture to talk about contesting visions that are existing. So I'll stop it here. Thank you for your patient listening. Thanks to the chair. Thanks also to my co-panelists, and thanks specifically to the Asian Conference for having me here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nandkishore. Due paucity of time, what I'll do is I'll straight away go to some of the questions that I've received from the panelists, for the panelists. For Dr. Ranjan, sir, this is from Shantanu Ghatak, the business unit head of Kanadevia, India. He would like to know more about the planning of ports in the Bay of Bengal, not only from the economic viewpoint, but also from the defense and strategic viewpoint. That's question one for you. Second is from Dr. Jeffrey Lalram Dina, who's the chairman, JJ Personality and Zoram Development Foundation. He wants to know what is the progress of the Chittagong deep sea port construction. Can we develop a riverine approach route from Mizoram to the port? And two questions for Dr. Nandkishore. The first is from Mr. Partha Roy, who is a strategy planner and senior journalist of the Kalinga Chronicles newspaper. He would like to know how is the deep sea port in West Bengal going to affect economic relations with Bhutan, Nepal, and its impact on other neighboring countries. The second query for you from Abhishek Agarwal, who's a visiting fellow at the CSEP. Setting up the Galathia Bay and Vizhinjam transshipment hubs has a direct impact on the port business in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. While both are strategically significant for India, what negative repercussions are we prepared for in our relationships with each of the three, where China already has major inroads, given that the port economy is a major GDP contributor for them? These are the set of two questions each. May I request Dr. Ranjan to go first, and then
can I just get you spoke about three countries with regard
yeah,
to
that's
the
Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Myanmar.
Bangladesh and Myanmar. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think on the port planning side, the Vision 2030 and 47 was prepared in consultation with all the stakeholders, with actually looking at the projected cargo increases which are likely to take place in keeping with the projected economic growth and other things. And based on that, specific hubs were identified, maritime clusters were identified. This part of both the Maritime India Vision 2030 and 47. And as part of that, specific targets and action plans already listed there, both for 2030 as well as 47. One of the slides which I showed talks of the port capacity going up to 10,000 by 2047, deep draft ports, 13 of them, some on the eastern coast, some on the western coast, the container handling facilities to go up, the ports becoming efficient, etc., etc. So they have been based on the projected increase in traffic and to make them smart, and the pipe, and that's why the need for the pipeline, so that the entire maritime sector is aware. And since these are going to be in PPP mode, the investor should be aware that these are the potential investment opportunities. Putting the DPR, putting the PP frameworks takes time, and therefore, with the vision and the port locations already identified, one of the slides which I showed have already listed out the various kind of ports which are there on the eastern side. The deep draft port at the western dock at Paradeep, the new investment in Tuticorin, the Bauda investment in Odisha, the Galathea Bay coming up, Vijingam is already up and running. So they are based on actual projected increase in traffic and how we'll be able to handle that efficiently and be able to compete and be able to provide our port users the best kind of service. They're able to get their goods across to the global market. That is the way it's been designed. And as everyone knows, most of the ports and the shipping sector are of a dual use nature. When it comes to a crisis, these are important infrastructure which can be of great help to any kind of security operation. They are part of the economic security apparatus, no doubt. But even for the naval security and other things, these infrastructures are of great value. So the basic consideration is economic, and to be able to provide supply chains which are able to meet the future demands. But of course, the security and other things that you said would also get addressed at the same time. That is the redeeming feature as far as the port infrastructure is concerned. The other question which was there with regard to the Chittagong port, the deep draft port there and linking through waterways to Myanmar, I think is a very interesting question. And while China has a great Malacca dilemma, because of which they've been able to create the kind of network of whether you call it a string of pearls or whether it is because of the logic of resilient supply chains, but that has been saving them in this crisis. So for when we talk of the chicken neck, I think whether it's Kaladan, whether it's access through any of these other places is critical. And the entire Northeast was connected before 1947 through these very same waterways. Mizoram has the Karnafuli River, and you have the Karnafuli River on which the Chittagong port is there. It's on a river called Karnafuli, which goes all the way to Mizoram. So if you're able to make this river navigable, you could very well have multimodal operations at Chittagong, which takes it to the border on Mizoram. Similarly, you have the Feni River, which touches Tripura and empties into the Bay of Bengal. If it is made into a navigable waterway, you will be able to come from places like Sabroom, where there was this new inland container terminal which has been established. And what was just mentioned, Professor Nandakishore mentioned that some area which was earmarked for a growth center has been handed over, etc., was supposed to be linked to the terminal which was supposed to link India and Bangladesh. And in addition to the road and the rail link, which would connect this part to Chittagong, you also have this possibility of the waterways through Feni River linking it to Chittagong and the larger Bay of Bengal. And you have the protocol of inland waterways, which has been there since 1972. And the idea is that we include some of these rivers as part of the protocol route, so that vessels, you have these vessels which can operate both in the river as well as the open coastal environment. We could very well have vessels which can go from the deep ports through the waterways into these areas. So that is the kind of framework we need to be able to create. And this has to be done in a manner so that, as was being mentioned by Professor Nandkumar, the coastal should also gain. If there are some gains being made, it should be shared so that everyone is better off. Talking of the deep sea port at Chittagong, the capacity which Chittagong has always been an issue which the Bangladesh authorities mention is saturated and so on and so forth. And therefore, the Matabari port, which is being developed, I think is the key. The Japanese investment and linking it to the rest of the Northeast is something which, if you're able to make it happen, it's going to be a win-win. And the kind of economic growth which the entire sector of the Chittagong Hill Tract and the other beneficiaries which would be there because of this, the both sides would gain. And therefore, while Chittagong has been in the pipeline for quite some time, but with Matabari coming in the limelight, I think we should quickly get it up and moving, and the Japanese and the other stakeholders should be able to design it such so that it becomes operational quickly. And therefore, the last slide which I had was talking of a new national supply chain strategy, which addresses the kind of concerns of delays and so on. And we have investments on board, make sure that even if it costs a bit of extra money, we are focused and make these corridors work and make them networked. Thank you.
Shall I?
Please go ahead. Dr.
Yeah,
Nandkishore,
thank you.
please go ahead.
Yeah. There were two questions. I'll answer the second one first. That's the Villinam and Galatia port. Certainly, these have strengthened India's maritime position. At the same time, I can also tell you the type of instruments and a lot of other things that we are using Villinam, they are still Chinese. We still haven't come into the Atmanirbharta part. There are a lot of other issues that are concerned. Secondly, I've also highlighted this one in Trivandrum Dialogue, where we had a lot more discussions on Villinam and other things, where I was telling that next to a port, there always should be an economic corridor. Now, while you develop a port, if you have not planned for it, for example, if the transit from, let's say, a place called Palakkad, that's also in the last part of Kerala, from there to, let's say, to the port, if something is coming, and if they are going to invest somewhere around 1.5 lakh rupees on that one, I think it makes no sense. Now, that's the reason it also has to comprehensively develop an economic hub as well, or let's say, in whatever way we would want to talk about it, there should be a possibility to have economic activities in and around the port. Now, for example, the question was very specific. What would happen to Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Myanmar? Will it create some sort of unintended geopolitical repercussions? Yes, for sure. Because though India doesn't plan to do this one, because Sri Lanka will be the first one, for example, because Villinam is a natural port, and this was used by the Cholas, it was used by different people at different point of time. It has come into a good shape as of now, and it's doing wonderful job. Now, Sri Lanka could face the greatest immediate economic impact, and Colombo actually may use India's transshipment cargo. It may reduce their port revenues and also many other related logistical activity. This could encourage Colombo to deepen their engagement more and more closer with China. Now, these are unintended consequences, unfortunate. For your national interest, you are developing your own port, but somewhere else in your backyard, you have to suffer with regard to this one. So there's no typical answer to whether this way or that way. This will continue to be a problem. With Bangladesh, it may perceive India's emerging transshipment network as a competition to the let's say Chattogram and other ports, no doubt about it. Dhaka or Bangladesh could consequently seek greater Chinese investment. That's something that I anticipate as of now. And Myanmar for sure projects a much more serious concern, because the growth of Galathea Bay could encourage Myanmar to accelerate alternative projects such as, let's say, Dabe, with greater Chinese or Russian involvement even, because at the end of the day, Russia will not bother that this will perhaps hurt India's national interest or anything. As long as they're able to make some sense, they'll come in there. Now, this also could intensify typical maritime competition around even the Andaman Sea and the approach to the Malacca Strait, which my co-panelists spoke about in the beginning itself. Therefore, I don't see what is the way out in this one. For sure, India should not go for a port dominant strategy, but rather it should see as a regional port network, and it should integrate all of these people and then see to it that there are components of connectivity that help each other. There are also feeder services, and then also logistical operations that can work together. The second question was typically on, I think, the West Bengal deep port. Deep sea port, that was the question to me. And what will happen to Nepal and Bhutan? Will we be able to have a greater say with regard to this was proposed somewhere as of in 2026 August, if I am right with regard to the information that I have. It has not even entered into construction. It was proposed at Tajpur, but the original site itself, now my sources say that they're reconsidering, and they have proposed a new place that's around 10 kilometers from Tajpur, a place called Dadan Patrabar, where around 1,700 acres of land is somewhere available. And I think still the final project component is pending. But if this happens, this typical port can substantially increase India's leverage over Nepal and Bhutan, because both of them are landlocked nations, and they will for sure depend on India. Now, India can offer dedicated cargo corridors, cheaper transshipment, rail and road connectivity through West Bengal itself. And they can also get integrated customs and logistic facilities, which is again another interesting development that it can take. I think it has been pending for a long time. Perhaps Bengal should have gone for this one maybe 30 years ago, and that's where it stands. And this will perhaps make Bengal a maritime gateway for the whole Himalayan economy itself. This is where I'm thinking. That's why I said connectivity component should be to help someone, because these landlocked nations also have certain rights. And if we respect that and then take it forward, then it will strengthen India's influence through connectivity, rather than a typical political pressure that they generally get involved and they become hesitant about it. There where I'll stop it, perhaps. Thank you.
Great. Just for the information of all, West Bengal has announced a 19,000 crore maritime policy, package, where they are looking to make West Bengal a maritime hub by 2031. And Dadan Patrabar, if you were to go by recent statements in the press by the Honorable Chief Minister of West Bengal, it can be understood that he is already in talks with Adani to probably develop Dadan Patrabar, which, as you rightly mentioned, is about 10 kilometers south of Tajpur, which was the original plan. But unfortunately, because of availability of land, that has not taken off. And hopefully, better late than never, hopefully this will take off, and there will be more regional cooperation in the. Despite having run out of time, I'll just take one odd question each, both for Dr. Ranjan and for Dr. Nand Kishore. If you can have a quick comments. The question for Dr. Ranjan is, this is from Dr. Mustafa Sayyad Itimun Alam. He is from the Assam Downtown University, and the question is, given the recent blockade in the Strait of Hormuz by Iran and the US presence and claims over the region, how can India prevent future competition and control over the Bay of Bengal from the US and other major powers? Dr. Nankishore just mentioned possible Russian, investment in Myanmar, which is actually cannot be ruled out. And the second part of the question is, how vulnerable is the region and India's capability in addressing such issues? The question for Dr. Nand Kishore is from Punzang Shering. He is the executive director of the Ability Bhutan Society. And the question is, how would Bhutan, as a landlocked country in the Himalayas, contribute towards a vision of connectivity and growth of the competing ports in the Bay of Bengal to reap benefits from this initiative? Whilst you have partly answered it in your last essay, but if you could dwell upon it, since it's a direct question from me. So, Dr. Ranjan, may I ask you for quick comments, and thereafter I'll hand over to Dr. Nankishore.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a great question. And as I mentioned in my presentation, Hormuz is a wake up call. And the challenges that we face because of the Hormuz, both in terms of fertilizer supply, in terms of LPG supply, and so on, has made everyone, brought everyone together. Fortunately, unfortunately, things happen in a crisis. And hopefully, this crisis, we should be able to have an arrangement where we look at the delays and other things which Professor Nandkumar mentioned, have a framework created where supply chain resilience is part of everything that all the agencies do. It may involve a bit of extra cost, but we can't afford a situation where the Hormuz impacts supplies of LPGs to our domestic households. The lesson that we learn here is that for example, the Middle East countries are able to tackle the crisis in Hormuz by taking containers through Oman and, as I said, the UAE through Sharjah, by having a network. And therefore, planning ahead, we have to have network of our supply chain infrastructure, not one port alone. The port have to be connected by waterways, railways, road. There have to be growth center around the ports. And for any commodity, it can't be reliant on one particular place. There have to be multiple such entities given our size and demand. And therefore, the need for everyone to work together rather than work in silos, and not within the country itself, but for countries across which are facing the same crunch. And whether when outside powers come and work here, all of us are going to be impacted, and therefore all the countries around in the region have to see the common kind of a benefit in working together and to be able to create systems that work for all of us in the mutual benefit of all of us. And therefore, whatever larger kind of a investment, effort, time, frameworks that is required to be created, we have to take a lead. We can't possibly take it as something which has been going on and will happen. But I think in a time frame, we have to make it work, and these things should become networked and operational. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. As the chair mentioned, I partially made a mention of it before. To me, Bhutan is always a preferred destination. In fact, our current prime minister, he chose that as the first country to go. We see them as friendly. We see them not trying to hedge, not trying to arm twist. They're not trying to do anything like that. They know the value of India. I think they've been one of the most stable one, less spoken about. Every time when people talk about that we are unable to manage our neighborhood, that is, they tend to forget, and they strategically leave out Bhutan as one of the most strongest and also a reliant partner. Now here where I see that Bhutan can actually become a growth partner rather than being just a transit beneficiary in India's connectivity strategy itself. For example, the planned 69-kilometer Kokrajhar-Gelepu railway and 20-kilometer Banarhat-Samste link. This will connect Bhutan directly to India's railway network. This will create trade and passenger corridors, and the Kokrajhar-Gelepu line is expected to begin somewhere around early 27. I think they will, with the speed in which India is actually constructing highways and many other projects, I think India will be able to do a good job. I think India is growing phenomenally well when it comes to construction corridors, more so with regard to railway network and the road network itself. Now, Bhutan also can contribute by developing the Gelefu Mindfulness City as a regional investment, logistics, tourism, service hub. It also has a possibility that can be linked to Assam and West Bengal. Both of them will benefit directly from this one. Then they can integrate road, rail, and the digital connectivity because they are landlocked. There is no other possibility. Now, this will allow Bhutanese product, tourism, and other services as an access to global market. That's a possibility. They can use India as the gateway to do some of these things. Now, Assam is already pinning. That's what, if I'm right, last time when I happened to have a conversation with someone known to Himanto, I was told that they are already planning a 6-lane highway that connects to Gelefu, and they want to improve also the rail connectivity part of it. There is also another recent development with regard to the whole component is the 4,000 crore Indian concessional credit line that will also support all these developments that Bhutan intends to have. That's why I think our Prime Minister is very, very clear. He wants to see Bhutan as a Himalayan gateway to Southeast Asia. That is his thought, and he would want to keep it that way as the most precious one. And that's why India would want to keep this physical as well as economic connectivity that will enable Bhutan, even if they think that they may not be able to contribute in a big way, but that will enable Bhutan to become part of India's growth story and also part of the regional growth itself. I'll stop it here.
Thank you. So, what to me, as the moderator, emerges from this very, very stimulating and interesting discussion and views expressed by both our eminent panelists is that one, the Bay of Bengal has tremendous potential, yet untapped. Two, regional resilience holds the key, given the geopolitical crisis that is brewing in West Asia and what a couple of years earlier COVID showed us, that relying solely on global chains, supply chains, could end up in disaster. And third, in the Bay, if we are to reach where we want to, economic cooperation has to precede, has to predicate everything above competition. So I think with these three key takeaways from me, I would like, in the paucity of time, to bring this a very interesting session to a close. All that remains for me is to thank both our eminent panelists. And whilst everybody is online, so I don't know if the loud thumping of the desk can be really heard, but I'm sure this will convey the message that a huge round of applause to both our eminent panelists. And I would now request Mohit to take over and bring the session to a formal close. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of Asian Conference, I would like to sincerely thank our distinguished moderator, Commodore Devesh Lahiri, and our eminent speakers, Dr. Sanjeev Ranjan and Dr. Nandakishore MS, for sharing the valuable insights and making this such an amazing and engaging discussion. We also thank everyone who joined us and contributed through your questions and comments. We hope today's conversation has offered useful perspectives on strengthening port competitiveness, connectivity, and growth in the Bay of Bengal. The recording of this webinar will be available on Asian Conference's YouTube channel for those who would like to revisit the discussion. Thank you once again for being with us. Wishing everyone a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.